Welcome to Time to Talk Science and Medicine, a new podcast designed to highlight translational researchers from Queen's University, Kingston, Ontario. The main goal of these podcasts will be to focus on the researcher, find out where they've come from, what motivates them, and how their research will change the world. We also try and find out a little bit about the person behind their dangerous idea. What makes their research world-class? My name's Dr. Charlie Hindmarch, and I'm a genomics researcher at Queen's University.
And my name is Dr. Stephen Archer. I'm a cardiologist and the scientific director of the Translational Institute of Medicine, or TIME, here at Queen's University. Today, we're joined by Dr. Jennifer Flemming, who has completed her clinical training in gastroenterology, hepatology, and liver transplantation. In her clinic, she works with patients with chronic liver diseases, including alcohol-associated liver disease.
She also serves as a chair for the Guidelines Committee for the Canadian Association for the Study of Liver Disease. Her laboratory is funded by multiple sources, including the CIHR, and her research relies on understanding large clinical data sets to try and understand who is getting sick and why.
So, Dr. Flemming, thank you for coming in today to our show. As Charlie mentioned, you're both a clinician and a scientist, and we're sort of interested to find out, how did you launch along this crazy path to become a clinician scientist?
Well, thank you both for having me here today. My path is a little bit related to circumstances and opportunities, I think. I don't think when I started this journey that I ever really thought of myself as a clinician researcher. But I think along my journey, I had the fortune to be connected with mentors and individuals who've really shaped my career and kind of showed me the path of science and research and how exciting it can be, especially when you're studying something that you're very passionate about. And I think that, initially in my career, I felt some sort of a imposter syndrome and not really necessarily seeing myself as a scientist. But I think other people saw things in me which they thought were important traits that would serve me along this path. And what actually ended up happening is that I kind of took the road less traveled, I think, and took those opportunities when they presented themselves, even though they seemed to be different than what maybe some of my colleagues were doing. And I think that's really how I ended up here was based on opportunities and great mentorship.
We were chatting a bit before this, and you were telling me the story that you were apparently almost done with university, had no desire whatsoever to be a doctor or a scientist. Tell me about that again.
Yeah, so I, kind of growing up, there was nobody really in my family or in my immediate circle who had been involved in academics. And so I was doing an undergraduate degree in science and decided that, maybe I should do research for the summer because that would be great for my CV, not really knowing where my long-term path was going to be. And this was one of these circumstances and opportunities where I was working in a basic science laboratory during the summer, and there was 2 medical students working there at the same time. And so we spent a lot of time together talking at lunch and, while we're doing our work. And I really learned from them what training to be a physician was like and how it incorporated both kind of science as well as clinical and the personal aspects, which I really enjoyed. So it was really that circumstance which sparked my interest in being a physician. But at that time, I hadn't done all the things that most people do when they want to get into medical school. I hadn't done volunteering. I hadn't done the MCAT. I hadn't done any of those things. And so I that's, again, why I kind of took the road less traveled. And so I had to, once I figured out that was something that I was passionate about, I made those next steps in order to get into medical school. And while I was doing that, I ended up going to Boston University to work in a immunology lab as a research technician. And that, again, kind of sparked my interest in science and kind of working through a problem and troubleshooting and then seeing the results and the satisfaction of kind of seeing a project from start to finish. So that's how my story started.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And it sounds like the issue there was you were, I think, given a project for yourself to work on, and you had that choice in the road about whether you pick this opportunity up or you pass it by.
That's right. I think that the principal investigator I was working for, maybe potentially saw something in me and most of the time research technicians work on projects either of the PI or the graduate student, and they don't really have ownership per se on the project. But I was given the opportunity to take ownership on a project and see it through from start to finish, and then be first author on that manuscript. And I think that was really integral in really opening my eyes to, what the scientific process was, kind of coming up with a question, designing the study, troubleshooting it along the way, and then interpreting the results. And it was really exciting for me, and kind of being in that environment, and then seeing other people who were doing the same thing and also getting as excited about it. I think it was a circumstance that I wasn't necessarily looking for, but I think shaped my future.
And you're telling Charlie and I about a couple of other encounters you had, like then once you finally got into medical school and you're working away, and then in your residency, you had two more sort of interactions that pushed you down the research path.
Right. So when I was doing my internal medicine training, I quickly realized within the first year that my clinical interests were in gastroenterology as well as hepatology. And so, as many residents do, they get involved in research to try and, explore the field a little more, beef up your CV. And I connected with Dr. Lawrence Hookey, who was the program director for gastroenterology at that time, and talked to him about research. And he did something very similar that is kind of a trend, I think, that's happened to me, is that he gave me the opportunity to come up with my own question and not necessarily just jumping on a project that had already been and going on. And so I really took ownership over that, and really got the satisfaction of seeing things from start to finish. I also had the opportunity during the interactions with him to see how excited he would get when he would get his results back from his study. So I distinctly remember sitting in his office one day, and the excitement, it was like a kid at Christmas. He was about to open up the results, the final results of his bowel prep study, and was just, he just seemed so excited and invested in it. And I think that also had a big influence on me.
I've seen Dr. Hookey excited. He and I play hockey together, and I remember one time he actually got a hold of the puck, and he seemed very excited, but he didn't have that puck very long.
Yeah, bowel prep results, hockey pucks. He gets excited about it.
Shots fired. Dr. Hookey, if you're listening, you know where to find me.
Absolutely, and a podcast coming soon to time. So it's really interesting that your story really, your story as a clinician really started out in research and science. And that's kind of neat, because what we're trying to do in the TMed program, which is part of TIME, is really try and get students to kind of embody research and clinical practice at the same time. Do you think that was important for your development to have that research component from day one?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think when you're doing your clinical training, you're so busy and everything is focused on the clinical aspects. And so you don't get the opportunity necessarily to learn about the scientific process. So I think that my story is a bit unique in that, I learned about the scientific process kind of before I went into clinical medicine. So had that kind of curiosity and had the understanding of, what it was like to see something from start to finish. And then because of the opportunities that presented themselves along the way, I continued to kind of foster that curiosity. And then once I started doing my fellowship training in the clinical field that I was most interested in, then incorporating that into my love of clinical medicine was kind of like the perfect storm, where it all just came together and said that, yes, this is what I want to do. I want to be able to take care of my patients, but I also want to try and improve their health by advancing the field based on the skills and knowledge that I had acquired through my other training.
Okay, well, thank you. So we have some sensation of your origin story and your background and how you got to this point. But now you're an accomplished scientist and clinician at Queen's University. What's your big idea?
So I think my big idea is breaking stereotypes. So what I had noticed, at least in my clinical work, is I think that in general and in society in general, everybody has this sort of stereotypical person that they picture when somebody says, oh, you have liver disease, you have cirrhosis. And
what is that? What does that person look like?
And that person is typically a middle-aged Caucasian male with alcohol use disorder. And I think that that's what, in general, most people think of when they hear that. But as I was going through my training and seeing the evolution of the types of patients that were coming into clinic or to the hospital with liver disease, sure, there were those types of people, but there was also a big diversity of other types of people, and specifically younger individuals and specifically younger women. And so that was a little bit contrary to, what I had been taught in medical school and kind of when we speak about liver disease. And what I was noticing is that there was a lot more younger demographics of individuals coming in with liver disease. And so that's what really kind of sparked my interest in looking at the epidemiology of liver disease and specifically of cirrhosis over time. And to do that, we used ICS databases to look at who were the people that were getting cirrhosis and what did they look like and what type of liver disease did they have.
So you mentioned a database there. Could you just clarify what that is for our audience, please?
Sure, happy to. So the ICS databases are linked databases on routine healthcare information for all individuals on Ontario covered under the Ontario Health Insurance Plan. So each individual in Ontario who has a health card number is given a unique identifier. And those individuals can be linked to over 100 different databases within ICES. So the data that is contained in there has inpatient, outpatient information. It has information on social determinants of health, has pharmacy data. So all of these databases you can link together to get a really interesting population level view of many chronic diseases and acute conditions in Ontario.
So your process here was you're in the clinic, you make a direct observation based on what you're seeing hour by hour, day by day, week by week, and then you're going to kind of like look at this large database to see whether your observation actually maps out across Ontario.
That's right, because, the question is it just what I'm seeing in my one clinic here at Kingston Health Sciences Center, or is this something that's happening more broadly in our population? So really, the best way to do that is to use these large data sets, because it's going to be almost impossible for you to go to every hospital and try and extract information on every patient. But given the resources at ICES, you really have access to all of these individuals, over 14 million people in Ontario, to understand different trends that could be occurring in your location. Is it different in the province? Does it differ by, different socioeconomic factors? And so it provides a really unique opportunity that's actually pretty unique in North America specifically, because the United States has a very fragmented healthcare system and they aren't able to have the same look or scope of studies that we can. And so that's why these databases are so powerful for doing the type of research that I do.
And that reminds me, you were telling me you caught the big data bug in San Francisco. It's a great city, but it's not usually where you think of to go to get interested in big data.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the other important factors in my career development was my mentor that I had at the University of California, San Francisco, Dr. Nora Tarot. And she's a clinician investigator as well, and really is very good at mentoring junior trainees to try and figure out what they are interested in and get them to where they want to be. So when her and I first started our mentor-mentee relationship, she really tries to tease out of me what I liked. And what I really liked was epidemiology, and understanding the natural history and outcomes of patients with liver disease. And in my graduate training, I had received skills on biostatistics, study design, and using large databases and using statistical software in order to analyze that. So she had introduced me to a large data set there called the SRTR. So it's the Scientific Registry of Transplant Recipients. So it's a large database of all individuals who were listed or received transplantation in the entire United States. And so we were able to use that database initially to look at individuals with cirrhosis who got hepatocellular carcinoma and looked at risk factors. And it gave me the opportunity to understand the nuances of working with large data, how to do it, how to properly do study design, And that really kind of set my trajectory to then be wanting to further my research when I came back to Canada in working with large data.
And when you say the words cirrhosis and hepatocellular cancer, they don't sound good, but if you're a layperson, you may not realize how bad they are. So what are the implications? You were finding these people, particularly young women, you were saying, that had cirrhosis, but what are the implications of having cirrhosis? What does that mean for you as a person?
So basically, if you were to look in a textbook and say, what's the definition of cirrhosis? It means that you've had some sort of chronic liver injury that's been going on for a long time to the point where your liver has developed significant scar tissue that puts the liver at risk of liver failure. So typically, if we think back to our stereotypes of, a middle-aged Caucasian male with cirrhosis, the implications of liver failure and the sequelae, if they happen kind of later on in life, would have different implications than if you're a younger individual. So the analogy I use with patients is having cirrhosis is like having a 20-year-old car. So it's rusty, it may not be as nice as a new one off the lot, but if you treat it well and you take care of it, that old car can run on the road for a long time. But if that car continues to be damaged repeatedly over time, it's at risk of breaking down. So for instance, if you're an individual who has cirrhosis by the age of 30 years old and our average life expectancy is 80, you've got another 50 years that you have to take care of this car. And so chances are at some point in time, this car is going to break down. And you're going to be trying to figure out whether or not you can fix it and get it back on the road, or whether or not you need to trade it in for a new one and get a liver transplant. And so the implications of having this chronic condition at a much younger age means that you're going to be at risk of developing these complications for much longer in your life. And a lot of these individuals, that's really their only medical comorbidity.
Yeah. And they have all these problems of bleeding and confusion and
that's right. You can have bleeding. You can have you can retain fluid and develop fluid in the belly, which we call ascites. You can develop confusion because your liver's not properly clearing your toxins, and you can get what we call encephalopathy. And then hepatocellular carcinoma is a primary liver cancer, and the people who are at risk of that are individuals with cirrhosis. 1% to 5% of people every year with cirrhosis will get hepatocellular carcinoma. So there's multiple different potential problems that can come up, and then management of these conditions that go on long term.
So that leads me to ask about your latest discovery, because if cirrhosis weren't bad enough, it sounds like your latest discovery has taken you into other, perhaps even more sinister areas.
That's right. So we just talked about the development of cirrhosis and how it's typically it occurs over years and it's slow chronic damage. But in the setting of alcohol-associated liver disease, there's also this entity which we call alcohol-associated hepatitis. And what that is it's an acute severe liver injury from very high levels of alcohol consumption. And the analogy I use in this case is like it's car crash. So this is an individual who could have previously normally functioning liver, may not even have cirrhosis, but because of the amount of inflammation and insult from that acute heavy alcohol consumption, you can go directly into liver failure without even having to go through that slow chronic process. And so we were seeing a lot of individuals, especially young individuals, presenting to hospital with this condition, alcohol-associated hepatitis, and specifically young women. And so what we wanted to do is we wanted to, again, look at these trends over time, and we wanted to look at it from a sex and gender lens and look at the differences between males and females. And so what we were able to show is that in Ontario over the past 20 years, the number of adolescents and young adults, so we really only looked at individuals between the ages of 13 to 39, and we wanted to look to see how often they were coming in with this very severe liver injury from alcohol. And we showed that the percent of cases increased by 8% per year between 2002 and 2021. And that each time there was a change in governmental alcohol policy, the number of individuals coming into the hospital with this acute liver injury continued to go up. And it was most exacerbated in the setting of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we know that alcohol sales in general in Canada went up, but this had a huge implication, especially on our younger individuals coming in with severe liver injury. Then what we did is we looked to say, okay, we know in general the short-term outcomes for this very severe liver injury, but we don't know what happens long-term to these individuals. And if these people are young and they're going to have to be living for, well, hopefully long periods of time, what actually happened to them down the road? And what we actually found is that in these young individuals, after an average of 5 years, 25% of them had unfortunately died.
That's amazing.
Yes. And so this was, very concerning for us and kind of something that we were seeing clinically. And then what we wanted to look at was the difference of outcomes between males and females, because we were also noticing that difference. And what we noted is that in young individuals who were lucky enough to survive their initial hospital presentation, that females were much more likely to develop cirrhosis or liver failure in the future than were men. So kind of confirming what we were seeing clinically. And then looking at the very low rates of liver transplantation. That's really the only way to save somebody's liver once you've developed liver failure that's irreversible. And unfortunately, despite the fact that these individuals were developing severe liver injury, they weren't getting access to liver transplantation, and they were unfortunately passing away from their severe liver injury.
And that big rise in incidence of this liver disease related to alcohol in women, is that a reflection of the mommy wine culture, or is it a reflection of what changed? You said government policies changed. So just tell me more about that.
So I think, it's multifactorial. It's kind of a perfect storm. So if you look historically at alcohol and consumption between males and females, let's say 50 years ago, males were much more likely to consume alcohol and were much more likely to consume heavy amounts of alcohol. But now this gender gap has been decreasing over the past number of decades, and data would suggest that now women are consuming alcohol at a similar rate to males. But we also know that women are at a higher susceptibility to damage from alcohol than males for multiple different reasons. One is the amount of alcohol dehydrogenase in the body. Females have 30% less of that. We know that females have a lower percentage of body water, so the actual concentration of the alcohol gets higher. And we know that the liver is a sex hormone responsive organ, so the influence of estrogen, testosterone are also here at play.
Just because not everyone in our audience will be familiar, tell me more about alcohol dehydrogenase and this sexual dimorphism.
So alcohol dehydrogenase is the key enzyme that breaks down alcohol into its non-toxic metabolites. And so it's secreted in the stomach. And so studies have shown that if you look at the amount of alcohol dehydrogenase produced in the stomach, it's 30% less in women. Therefore, they're metabolizing alcohol differently. And so these toxic byproducts are higher among women than they are among men.
So it's not just that a woman is proportionally smaller than a man. Actually, at kind of a molecular and a biochemical level, there are differences as well.
That's right. Yeah. So there's multiple things going on here.
Do you think this is an unintended consequence of the equality of sexes in society? That do women think that they can nonetheless drink as much as a man? Why shouldn't they be able to? And therefore they do, but they're not physiologically equipped to handle as much of the toxin?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that's at play here. Like I said, with looking at the trends in alcohol consumption, that women are drinking at similar rates as are men. You mentioned the mommy wine culture, which is this kind of culture that's evolved in, at least North American society over the past decade, where it's become socially acceptable for mothers to consume wine because of the high amount of stress that they're having dealing with their families. And so I think that the alcohol industry has kind of taken advantage of this. And if you note over time that now marketing of alcohol is now specifically targeted for women. And there's studies showing that if you look at alcohol marketing, there's a higher proportion of marketing which is targeted towards women. So having, more feminine colors on it. Restaurants are developing these kind of girls' night, events where you can come and get alcohol for lower prices if you're a female, and all of those sorts of things, I think, are also contributing to this burden of disease that we hadn't seen, 2 decades before this.
Thank you. So you've just gone into quite a lot of detail about your main research and kind of, what you do clinically. I just want to bring it back down to kind of a little bit more simple levels, just to make sure that this podcast is accessible. So imagine I'm a high school student. What do you need me to know about your research so that I can make better choices in life?
So I think fundamentally, and I think this is something that, we need to think of as a society, is educating individuals about alcohol and the potential harm. So we know that there's a certain threshold where people are at risk of developing alcohol-associated liver disease based on how much alcohol they're consuming. And that's different between males and females. And so if we talk kind of at a higher level, if a male is consuming more than 30 grams of alcohol a day or a female is consuming more than 20 grams of alcohol a day, you're at risk of liver disease.
I'm just going to interrupt you because I don't think I've ever gone to a bar and ordered my alcohol by grams. So can you tell me more about that just quickly?
Right. So that's exactly what I was going to talk about, is that, this general public does not know how many grams of alcohol are in what they're consuming. And that's because there's currently no labels, or there's no mandatory labels on alcohol to show the content. And this is in contrast to our food labeling, right? Like when you go to the store and you pick up any sort of food product, you turn it over and you look on the back, you know exactly how much protein, carbohydrate, and fat is in that, as well as sodium and all of these vitamins. You pick up a bottle of wine and you look at, you have no idea how many grams of alcohol are in that bottle of wine. And so it is very difficult for most people in the general public to really understand how much alcohol they're consuming and be able to relate that back to what the current guidelines are for what you should be consuming.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like when you go to the grocery store now and you see a giant bag of potato chips, it now says on it non-sarcastically, this is not a single serving. So you were blowing my mind by telling me how many drinks are supposed to be in a. So you said 20 grams for women in a drink.
That's right.
And what's a bottle of wine?
So in general, 10 grams of alcohol is 5 ounces of wine. In a standard bottle of wine, there's approximately 8 standard drinks, or 80 grams of alcohol. So,
it's very disappointing to hear.
It's yes, but it's important information that we need to know. And so when I'm taking histories from patients, when I see them clinically, and I'm trying to understand whether or not they're using alcohol, which would put them at risk of liver disease, if you say, okay, so how much alcohol are you using a day? Oh, just 1 glass of wine. But everybody's glass is different. Every glass can be a different size. So really what I try to say, well, how many bottles will you drink per week? And then that gives me a better sense of how much total alcohol or grams of alcohol somebody is consuming. It gets difficult when people are sharing alcohol, so consuming with somebody else, and you're trying to quantify. So this is a bit more of an art than a science. But I think, point number one, going back to, what would we tell the high school students, is they need information to understand what they're actually consuming. And I think that we don't really have access to that information in the Canadian general public, unless you are someone like me who does this, all the time for a living, and I know how to quantify alcohol. It's very difficult for people to understand how much alcohol they're consuming.
It can't be the whole story, though, because actually sort of like getting almost the marketing of alcohol and getting this information out there is only part of the battle, because when I go grocery shopping, as you say, you can read on the back, and this is not a single serving, and I can read it doesn't stop obesity being a widespread Western problem anyway. Mm-hmm. So it's not like people go and actually take notice of this information. So what other kind of cultural shifts would be required to be able to reduce the harm to particular groups of society?
So we know from multiple different studies that the individuals who are vulnerable in their social determinants of health are actually most impacted by alcohol-associated liver disease. And so it's been shown in other countries outside of Canada that one of the best policy changes that can be made to try and limit the harm to alcohol to an entire society is minimal alcohol pricing. Or changing the amount that it costs in order to purchase alcohol. And that's been shown in the UK to have an impact on population levels of alcohol-associated liver disease. We also know that individuals who are impacted by alcohol-associated liver disease have a high burden of other underlying conditions, such as mental health conditions and substance use disorder and addictions. And so when I see people clinically and I'm talking to them and they have underlying alcohol use disorder and trying to figure out, who do you drink with? What's the situations you drink around? There are many, many individuals who seem to be self-medicating underlying mental health conditions with alcohol. And so I think that really also speaks to the fact that it's very difficult to access mental health support within our society. And there's a large stigma attached to that, as there is with alcohol and alcohol use disorder. And so a lot of people may be ashamed and actually not presenting to medical care and seeking the care that they need because they're worried about the implications of them disclosing this information.
It's funny from everything that we say, and I know this has been said before, but just like cigarettes, there's no way that alcohol would be licensed if it was released as a new product in 2024.
That's true.
You need to take a page from the federal Liberal government and have a 3-carbon tax. That's an internal geek joke for alcohol is 3-carbon based. And so this can be the new Dr. Flemming 3-carbon tax.
That's right.
So this all sounds great. You've made an amazing discovery, but I'm sure it hasn't always been easy. And most clinician scientists have some story of a bump in the road. So was there a period of time when you thought this glorious career might not occur?
Yeah, I think, the hardest part for any new clinician investigator is those early years when you're trying to get your research program off the ground and trying to get people to be as invested in your big idea as you are. And so early in my career when I was, trying to get my research program up and running and looking at, this initial trend that I saw where there was more young people or the rates of liver disease were going up higher in young people. And I was trying to, write grant applications to get more funding to look into this further. I got a lot of no's. And so that was very hard, as I think anybody who's worked in science can understand. And I have this memory of when I was in Paris for a conference. And I was kind of at an academic low point. I had, the paper that I was really invested in looking at these trends had been rejected from the journal. Grants that I had applied for had been rejected. And so I remember I was walking up the Champs-Élysées and I was really, thinking, could I continue to do this? Could I continue to move on and, deal with all of these rejections? And knowing that I thought that this was really important, it didn't seem like anybody else really thought it was important. And I remember being sad and walking and getting a text message from my mentor here at Queen's, who was Dr. Chris Booth, who was my ICES mentor. And he said, "Have you checked your email today?" And I hadn't. And so I was able to check it at that time. And I had been awarded a Career Development Award from the American Association for the Study of Liver Disease to study these exact questions. And kind of getting that support from the society who I felt most invested in and them kind of understanding what I was trying to do and the importance really kind of changed my trajectory. And I think without getting that, I'm not sure if I would have kept going. It's hard to know. I think we all think that we would, but I think that really was a turning point that really set my career off and allowed me to continue to do the work that I've been doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people think of grants as the way we get money to do our science, but they're also hugely important psychologically as third-party validation that you're a player in the field and you're respected by your peers. And that rejection, every time that happens, it's like it's almost like a personal dating situation where you've been personally rejected and it hurts. So
it does, yeah.
But that's a nice place to get good news on the Champs-Élysées.
Yeah. So, if I had to write a movie about my career, I definitely would put that scene in the movie.
And you could have 20 ounces of alcohol to celebrate.
That's right. And only 20.
And only 20.
A day.
A day, yeah, per day.
Okay, so I'm a basic researcher and kind of one of the tenets I play. I'm only as good as my next paper or my next discovery. So this really is a question as to what comes next. Mm-hmm. Obviously, your accomplishments to this point are great. Where does the future go in your field?
Yeah, so I think my research team has really established that there's a big problem here, and there's specifically a big problem in young individuals who are at early points in their life. And what the problem is now is that we've identified this as a problem, but we do not have good access to help treat these individuals. As anybody who's worked with people with underlying alcohol use disorder know that it's a chronic condition that is difficult to treat, that can relapse, and it's something that needs to be treated. And right now, at least in where we live here at Kingston, it's very difficult to access appropriate services for patients with underlying alcohol use disorder, specifically if they have underlying advanced liver disease. Because treatment of alcohol use disorder is not as simple as, hey, I'm going to write you a prescription, here will make you better. sure, there's pharmacotherapy for it, but there's also behavioral therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy that is an essential component to treating this underlying disease. And right now, that is almost impossible to access. It also takes a lot of time commitment for patients. It's something that you have to commit to and do regularly. So people would either have to take time off work, take time off from parenting, any of the things that they're doing in their life in order to engage in this program. And it's also very important to think about the underlying demographics and how you're going to tailor this, because different groups of people are going to need different types of support in order to engage in this. So it might need transportation, you might need language services, you might need kind of after hours access. And in our current medical system, everything happens between 9 and 5. And if people are not able to engage in that during those timeframes, it can be very difficult for people to access. So my next goal is really trying to figure out how we can develop a multidisciplinary team with hepatologists, addictions, mental health, social work, to figure out how we can best support these young individuals who have a very high risk of mortality.
That's impressive. It's an incredibly high aspiration. So thanks, Dr. Flemming, for coming in and taking the time to talk to us about your clinical operation and the amazing research you're doing, and how you've highlighted a new public health crisis that I think many of us were unaware of or dimly aware of. But of course, before we wrap up this podcast, we want to make sure we get to know you as a person, not just as a clinician scientist. And so we've got a few incredibly profound questions that Dr. Hindmarch and I are going to ask.
I'm a little scared here.
Yeah, that's right. Don't worry. This is all recorded and will be widely available internationally, so your words will be used against you. So Dr. Hindmarch.
Well, we've got a whole host of questions, but here's a new one that I thought of this morning that I thought I should put in. If you could have one superpower, what would it be and why?
It would be teleportation. So if I could teleport myself from one area to the other, and then that way I could multitask better and be at multiple different places at one time without having to, if I could stop that commuting time and things like that.
It's funny, my son gave exactly the same answer
thing,
of teleportation, so you could get around quickly. I thought
That's right.
I think the likelihood you give that answer is directly related to how long it's been since you were on an Air Canada flight.
Yeah, we just went to Costa Rica recently, so
maybe that's why that superpower.
Yeah.
So if you just tell us, what do you do in your spare time when you're not being a mom, a clinician, and a scientist? Like, what are your hobbies?
So I'm a big sports fan. That was, a consequence of, I think my dad was the sports editor of our local paper growing up. So I've grown up, watching and loving sports for a long time, and participating in physical activity. So now I have two young sons who are 9 and 10. And so most of my spare time is participating in their sports activities. So most evenings we're out either on the basketball court or on the football field or traveling. This weekend we were in Guelph for a basketball tournament. And so that's how I spend a lot of my time right now, is fostering my children's love of sports just like mine.
You keep fit and healthy by running around after your children and not having enough time to actually eat food.
That also helps.
As a dad of 3 boys, I feel your pain. Okay. So here's what kind of music do you like to listen to, and can you play or sing that music?
Oh, I could answer that for her. I've got a deep cut tape. I've got a deep cut recording of Dr. Flemming doing some music. But anyway, let's see what Dr. Flemming admits to.
Okay, so I have a very eclectic music repertoire. But if I had to say what my actual all-time favorite type and genre of music is, it would be 1990s hip-hop music.
Yes.
Would be what I would, if I had to just, pick a playlist and put it on, that's what it would be. And so what Dr. Archer is referring to is a Christmas rounds that myself and my colleagues did 2 years ago, where we did a parody of Eminem's "Lose Yourself" to a bow preparation. And,
they were fully engaged.
We were fully engaged and fully singing. I would never want to, show that to anybody.
Link in the bio.
Or, I wouldn't say that, my talents of singing are going to take me anywhere, but it was certainly fun to do. And I think, the residents got a big kick out of it.
So the last question. So what's your favorite meal and can you cook it?
Favorite meal and can I cook it? So I think probably if I had to pick a favorite meal, it would be sushi. And I have never yet attempted to make it myself. There's, it's way too good in Kingston, especially. There's some really great sushi places. So given, the amount of time I spend doing my science and my clinical work and my kids and all that sort of stuff, I don't think that I could fit in sushi. But, I think down the road, that might be a hobby that I might take up.
Nice. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Flemming for coming in to discuss her research today. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to know more about Queen's University Translational Medicine researcher, or share this podcast, you can search for Time to Talk Science and Medicine wherever you normally look for podcasts.